Hi everyone. Okay, this lecture is about metaheuristic optimization, and a funny thing happened is that I recorded this session, but after it was recorded and I downloaded that from Zoom, I noticed that the voice wasn't recorded in the recording. It was disappointing, but that's fine. I'm re-recording this session. Hopefully, voice is recorded this time. Okay, let me share a screen. So, as I said, in this session, we are going to talk about search-based optimization or metaheuristic optimization. First, a little bit of introduction to that. Okay, consider that the objective function in the optimization problem might be simple enough. It means that it's not very complicated, although it might be non-convex, but it's not very complicated. So in these cases, we can use classic optimization. Whatever we have learned so far in this course, they were classic optimization methods. We will learn important classic. We learned important classic methods in this course. However, if the objective function or cost function is very complicated, then or if we have too many constraints, then we can use search for finding a good solution. For example, compare this and these two images. Of course, this is much more complicated. Or when in two-dimensional case, assume it's like this. It has so many local minimums compared to this, which is fairly simpler. So in these cases, it's the cost is highly nonlinear and highly non-convex. In these cases, we can use either search-based optimization or non-convex optimization. We introduced non-convex optimization in the previous session. Also, if an example of this optimization cost function is like this, which I have got this image from a paper for visualization of loss functions in neural networks, reference 1. So, by the way, when we have a feasibility set, which is the intersection of some inequality and equality constraints, then it means that, for example, in this function, we can only accept this range domain for x, or some domain of x in this range only we can accept, we can minimize the cost function. So the feasibility set or the constraints show us in which range we should search or we should optimize, and the cost also has some values, and it's like valleys and mountains. By the way, when we have two-dimensional optimization variable, we can show the third dimension as a cost value. So it will be something like this, and you can visualize the cost like some valleys and some mountains. Therefore, you can see that sometimes in the literature they call the cost function as a optimization landscape, because it's like a landscape. It has valleys and mountains. However, if we have more than two dimensions in the input, then you should imagine it. You can't visualize it on paper. So yes, also the cost here is a scalar. The cost might be multidimensional too, but usually the cost is a scalar. So in three cases, we might have we might need search-based optimization. So when the first case is that when the optimization landscape or cost function is very complicated or highly non-convex and highly nonlinear, such as these cases. For example, this happens in neural networks too. I have explained in the previous session why this happens in neural networks. Or when the gradient of function is hard to compute. sometimes it's very hard to calculate the gradient of the function. Do you remember in the classic optimization, calculating gradient is crucial, because in first order optimization, gradient is required. In second order optimization, both gradient and Hessian are required. The third case is that when the function is not known, but it works as a black box. So we have the function, we don't know what it is inside the function, how it is implemented, but we know that whenever we feed some input to it, it gives us some output. So it works like a black box. Similar to what we have in reverse engineering. In reverse engineering, we have a system, but we don't know how it is implemented, but we can feed different inputs to it and get outputs, and based on the outputs, we can guess how it is implemented inside, something like that. So it's like a black box. So it gets some input and outputs some output for the corresponding input. So in this case also, we don't have the function itself to minimize or maximize. We can't calculate the gradient, of course, because when you don't have the function, the implementation function, you can't calculate the gradient either. So in this case, or when the gradient is hard to compute, in the third case, the gradient is impossible to compute. Or when the gradient is hard to compute, or when the cost function is too complicated. In these three cases, then we need to either use search-based optimization, also called metaheuristic optimization, or non-convex optimization. Let's see. Okay, non-convex optimization was talked about in the previous session. Now, for optimization, as I said, we can use search, but we can have two types of search. First off, we can do a grid search or a brute force search, where we search, we divide the domain of X into some parts, and with some step size, which is a hyperparameter, the step size is a hyperparameter, where we evaluate the function value, like here, 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 here. We evaluate it, and for example, we want to minimize it. We find the minimum evaluation, it's like here, and we say this is the minimum of the function. Although the actual minimum is here, but we are close enough. As long as the step size is small enough, then we are close to it. Of course, the smaller step size, the more accurate we are, but we will be slower. And if it is two-dimensional, something like this, x1, x2, then we need to have a mesh grid. And in each part of the mesh grid, we need to evaluate the function, the cost function. And if it is multiple dimensions, we will have hypercubes of the mesh grids. So we can either do grid search, but it is slow. So as an alternative solution, we can do search. We can have a wise search. We can search wisely, which is also called metaheuristic optimization or search-based optimization. For that, an example is that we choose 3 points rather than having a grid, and then we evaluate the function in these points, and then we say, okay, this is a better local solution because this has a function value less than this and this. Then let this to search around itself, and these two to move toward this point. So this point moves toward this point. It means that its function value will be here. This point also moves toward this point, which is a better solution. Then its function value will be here. So they calculate the function value. They have a local search, but they move toward the better solution. So this is a wise search, right? And another example is that soon we have a room where there are several people who want to find a treasure, and we know that there is some treasure under the ground of this room, and the room is big, so it's very time consuming to have a grid search in the room and dig everywhere in the ground of the room. So we say, okay, let's randomly, each of us, search around ourselves, and then whoever finds a better solution, we move toward that better solution. So this is the idea of most of the metaheuristic optimization algorithms. Okay, now let's talk about heuristic and metaheuristic methods. So these terminologies, let's define them. When the problem is complicated, as we said, a heuristic method approximates its solution. So a method is called heuristic when it approximates the solution to a complicated problem. It gives a good enough guess. The heuristic method gives a good enough guess of the solution to the problem, but you may not really know how good it is. So it gives a good enough guess, but we don't know how good the solution is. Heuristics are often problem dependent. So for a specific problem, you design a specific heuristic algorithm or method. So you define a heuristic for a given problem. How, on the other hand, metaheuristics are problem independent. So it means that they are not designed for a specific problem. They can be applied to a broad range of problems. So they are heuristic methods which are problem independent. That's why they're called meta-heuristic. And meta-heuristic optimization methods can solve various complicated optimization problems using wise search. Okay. And meta-heuristic methods are considered as a family of methods in soft computing. So soft computing is a field of science which has several families of categories of methods, one of which is meta-heuristic methods. Another one is fuzzy logic and fuzzy control. Another one is connectionist models or neural networks. Another one is agent-based models such as multi-agent reinforcement learning. So soft computing has these concepts, and one of them is metaheuristics optimization. Okay. Now let's talk about exploration versus exploitation. These are two important concepts in metaheuristic optimization. And what do they mean? Before these two, let me define these. Optimization landscape. It is the optimization cost function. As I said, as you can see the cost function as valleys and mountains, which goes down and up. If you want to maximize the function, you find the top of the mountains. If you want to minimize it, you find the valleys. So they usually call it optimization landscape. When we have two variables, then the third value, when we have two dimensions over the input, then the output can be, the scalar output can be seen as the third dimension, so you can visualize it like what we have on the Earth. However, if we have more than two-dimensional input, then you need to imagine it. Okay. Local best and global best in landscape. So local best means that we already defined that in the preliminaries, but briefly saying that it means that in a neighborhood it's best. So if we are minimizing local best, means that in a neighborhood it is minimum in its neighborhood around it, such as this. This is a local minimum around, in a neighborhood around it, it's minimum. But global best is global in the whole domain of X. So it's like, this is the global. So here, for example, this is global minimum. This is a local minimum. This is a local minimum. In this case, this is a global minimum and this is the global maximum, right? So we have local best, global best. Also, we have exploitation and exploration. So exploitation relates to local search around the solution. Because the global optimum might be close to the current solution. So usually most of the metaheuristic algorithms, they have a local search. What do? They say, okay, I have some particles or solutions. Let me search around them in a neighborhood around them, and that's called local search. In this local search is what is it doing? It's exploiting the optimization landscape around the solution, every solution. That's why it's called exploitation. So local search relates to the task of exploitation. And why do we do that, by the way? Because we have found a solution. Maybe our best solution is close to it. Because when we have found a good solution, probably it's close to the best solution. Maybe we are here. We are here, maybe. And our best solution is close to it. But exploration says that, what if we have found a local minimum, a local good solution, and around it, if we search around it, we will get stuck in the local minimum. So getting stuck in the local minimum is a common issue in Metaheuristic optimization algorithms. In this case, we need exploration. Let's explore far away in the optimization landscape, in the domain or in the feasibility set of input. So explore the landscape because the global optimum might be far away from the current solution. So search far away from the solution, right? This helps not to get stuck in local optimum. If you do only exploitation, you might get stuck in the local optimum, but exploration also helps for not getting the local optimum. Probably we find a better solution far away from our current solutions. Okay, now the first metaheuristic optimization algorithm that I'm gonna introduce is genetic algorithm. What does it do? So genetic algorithm is based on natural selection and Darwinism. What are they? So first off, let me talk about the natural selection. According to natural selection, every generation tries to adapt better to the environment compared to the previous generation. It has been shown in biology, zoology, geology, and these fields of science that we have natural selection in the environment, meaning that the organisms try to compete with each other, and they try to adapt to the environment for the sake of surviving and living and continuing their generations. So the ones which lose this competition and can't adapt well enough to the environment, they will be removed from the cycle of generations gradually. And this is a matter of millions of years. So it's not it's not happening very fast. So it's very slow and millions of years. It's a process. An example is that you have a giraffe. Initial giraffes might have had shorter necks, but maybe some of the giraffes had some mutation or some changes in their genes, and they had slightly longer necks. Those giraffes with slightly longer necks could survive better because they had more food, because they could reach the top of the trees which had leaves, because they were eating leaves. But the ones which had shorter necks couldn't reach the leaves above the tree, and because of lack of food, they gradually were removed from the cycle of generations. They died because of lack of food. And then the ones which were remained, they mated with each other, and their children also had this characteristic of having long leg. So, and this gradually increased the length of the necks in the giraffes. So nowadays, giraffes, after millions of years, have very long necks. So this was an interesting phenomenon that Darwin found it first. That's what it's called, Darwinism. Also, Darwin was a scientist. And this process is called evolution. By the way, there is one important point that you should notice, that in evolution and in natural selection, where organisms adapt to the environment, but they don't necessarily get better. So there is a difference between getting better and adapting. Because for adapting to the environment, you might suit that environment better, but that might not be perfect for you. For an example is that, for example, the fact that our gullet and our pipe wind are close to each other, next to each other in our bodies, it's not perfect. It has a big problem because when we drink water or when we eat something, we might choke, and many people have died because of choking. So, however, we have adapted to the environment in this way. So there is a slight difference between adapting and getting better. That's one thing. In natural selection, the environment selects the ones which adapt better to the environment. Okay, now genetic algorithm, it's an algorithm proposed by John H. Holland in 1975, reference 2. It is inspired by the natural selection and Darwinism. That's interesting. It is one of the evolutionary algorithms because it's based on evolution. So there are a family of algorithms named evolutionary algorithms, which are based on some kind of evolution. Okay. And so before explaining this, let me tell you the idea behind metaheuristic optimization. In metaheuristic optimization, we usually, most of them, we usually have some solutions, and these solutions, if we usually have some solutions, and these, give me a sec. Okay, I was saying that in metaheuristic optimization algorithms, we usually have some solutions, and these solutions assumed our optimization variable is d-dimensional. Okay, and then it means that our solutions, some random solutions, are d-dimensional, each of which. So there are some points in the domain of the optimization in the feasibility set, and these points are the solutions, candidate solutions. So we have some candidate solutions, and these candidate solutions are named differently in different algorithms. For example, in a genetic algorithm, they are called chromosomes because it's based on chromosomes and genes and natural selection and these things. In other algorithm, it's called particle. There are some particles. Maybe in some algorithms, they are called animals. So we have some animals which interact with each other, or some humans which interact with each other, or some agents. Doesn't matter. As the core idea behind all of them is the same. So there are some candidate solutions. In genetic algorithm, they are called chromosomes. Okay. Every chromosome has several genes, and these genes, I think it's obvious, when you have a d-dimensional vector as a chromosome or candidate solution, these genes are showing the features or the dimensions of the candidate solutions. By the way, in metaheuristic optimization, these candidate solutions do some kind of local search, and they also interact with each other. They tell each other what solution, what cost function they have found around themselves, and then they move toward each other gradually until they converge. The candidate solutions usually converge to the global or local best in the optimization landscape. So this is the core idea behind most of the metaheuristic optimization methods. Here we say that every chromosome has several genes, and the genes are the features or dimensions of the candidate solutions, like this: chromosome 1, chromosome 2, until chromosome N. Maybe we have d-dimensional vectors, and each of which is a gene. So there are several possible ways to create chromosomes. One of them is value encoding, one of them is binary encoding, and one of them is order encoding. So what do they mean by so by value encoding? I mean that the chromosome is a vector, and each dimension is a gene, which might be a float value. So this is value encoding. Binary encoding means that the solutions are scalars, but we represent the scalar as a binary string. So for example, if the maximum number of x, so assume is 000110111. We can use 2 bits, so chromosomes of 2 genes, if x can be either 0, 1, 2, or 3. If it can be 4, then we need 3 bits. So we can convert them to the binary string by using binary genes. Also, we might have the order in some optimization problems. We might want to find the best order of something. And then in this case, each gene can be each permutation of the genes can show some order, some specific order. For example, 2, 3, 1, 4, or 1, 2, 4, 3, something like that. And the number of genes is a number of the number of samples in the sequence of order, right? So yes, we can have these cases to make the chromosomes. Okay. Now, genetic also fitness function. This is a concept which is used in most of the meta-heuristic optimization methods. The fitness function is, what is it? It's the evaluation of function at a candidate solution. So assume X is a d-dimensional variable, so x1 to xd, d-dimensional vector. Then at that point, we evaluate the function called the fitness function, and that gives us f of x. So this is evaluating fitness function. But there is a slight difference between fitness function and cost function. Usually, by convention, we want to maximize the fitness function and minimize the cost function. Therefore, if we have a minimization of some cost function, we can multiply the cost function by -1 to get the fitness function. Recall the preliminaries where we said how to convert minimization to maximization and vice versa. Also, fitness calculation. So at every iteration, we calculate the fitness of chromosomes to see how good they are. So meta-heuristic optimization methods are iterative optimization algorithms. Therefore, in each iteration, we need to do something. At the start of every iteration, we usually calculate the fitness of the candidate solutions, here fitness of chromosomes. Okay. Natural selection, then we do natural selection. It means that at every iteration, we select the best chromosomes to be the parents of the next generation. This is exactly what natural selection is, and we are using that in genetic algorithm. So we find the best parents which can have adapted to the fitness function better. We choose them. The other parents will die without any offspring or children, but the ones which are selected will mate with each other to make the children of the next generation. Okay, there are several ways to do the natural selection. How do we do that? How do we select the parents, the best parents for the next generation? One of them is elitism selection. It means that select top K chromosomes with the best fitness values. So sort the chromosomes from best fitness value to the worst one and just select the best K chromosomes. But this has an issue, a drawback, and that's getting stuck in the local optimum, right? Because what if most of the chromosomes are close to some local minimum and you haven't seen the actual global minimum far away from them? When you select the best K ones, then you will get stuck in the local best. Okay. So we can do a roulette wheel selection. And roulette wheel is like the roulette wheel in casinos. What do we do? For every chromosome, we calculate a probability of being good. So how good, by what do I mean by good? Compatible with the environment or having good fitness value. What do we do? For this, we say, okay, this is for every point, every candidate solution or every chromosome 1 to n, we calculate the probability of the ith chromosome to be pi as fi. Fi is f of xi. It means that the fitness value for the ith chromosome, fi over summation of fj's, j from 1 to n, right? So this is in the format of softmax. And this is a good technique to make some probabilities. Whenever you have some values, which they don't necessarily sum to 1, and they are not necessarily between 0 and 1, but you want to make them like a probability, to behave like a probability, you can divide each of them by the summation of all of them. Then it means that their sum will become 1, and they will become between 0 and 1. So this is a good technique for making, so we have some fi, some fitness values, but we want to make them probabilities. So this is the technique that we are using. Then they sum to 1, so they can put together in a pie chart or some roulette wheel. And we have this pointer Then we rotate this roulette wheel randomly, and this pointer will choose one of these. So the one which has higher probability has more chance to be selected by the pointer. And how do we implement this in the code in the computer? We can have these next to each other to be in the range between 0 and 1 because they sum to 1. Okay, the ones which have more probability take more portion in this range, and then we create a random float number between 0 and 1, uniform random between 0 and 1. Wherever it lands, it will select that portion. Of course, the portion with the chromosome with a larger portion has higher chance to be selected. Okay, right? This is another way to select the parents. Another one is stochastic universal sampling, or SUS selection. So it is similar to roulette wheel, but with more than one selection pointer, more than one pointer. So why do we do that? It gives more chance to chromosomes with less fitness value. Because roulette wheel has a problem that it gives higher chance to the ones which have very good fitness. Again, it has some drawback of the risk of getting stuck in the local best. Therefore, we can have multiple pointers so that we give chance to worse solutions, candidate solutions also. So this is what we might have 2, 3, or several pointers. How do we implement that? Again, between 0 and 1, we can generate several random points between 0 and 1 in computer. Another one is tournament selection. So what do we do in tournament selection? We say first we randomly select K1 chromosomes, and then we select K2 best chromosomes among them with the best fitness values. So the difference is that here we have X1 to Xn, we have n points, then randomly we select K1 of them, we select K1 of them, and then we rank these randomly selected points by their fitness values, and then we get the top K2 of them. So there is a difference between these tournament selection and elitism selection. Elitism selection just gets the best chromosomes. However, in tournament selection, we first do a random selection and then we rank them. This step of random selection also gives some chance to the ones which are not best. Why? Because probably we have very best solutions which are not selected by in this random selection, so they are not even having a chance to come to this ranking, right? Okay, we also have rank selection, and what is that? So it is close to the termination. Why do we do rank selection? I will tell you. So close to the termination, the probabilities of the roulette wheel with probabilities will become very close to each other. Do you know? So because initially, of course, the candidate solutions are very different away from each other, so they have different fitness values. So it means that in the roulette wheel they have different areas. However, close to the termination of the algorithm, their area is very similar, so they are almost very good, most of them. So we'll have a roulette wheel like this, almost with the same areas. So what do we do? It's not good enough, right? Because they have almost equal chances to be selected. So it will be like random selection then. So it's better that to rank chromosomes by their fitness values in the late iterations. In the late iterations, close to the termination, let's find the probabilities in the roulette wheel by the rank. So for example, we have 4 candidate solutions, then we rank them by their fitness values. For example, it becomes X3, X1, X4, and X2. Then probability of the third point will be 4/1 + 2 + 3 + 4. The second one will be probability of P1, which is the second chromosome. Best chromosome is 3 over 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. Also, the third one will be 2 over this sum, and the last one, which is the worst, is 1 over the sum. Of course, their sum is also 1, but they are between 0 and 1. They are also, the probabilities are corresponding to the ranks. Then we make this, so this one has higher chance now. And then we have the pointer. Although, note that you might be wondering, here we said that they are very close to each other, so they have almost equal fitness values. So what does this ranking mean? Of course, they have slightly different fitness values. For example, one of them is 2.3, one of them is 2.331, one of them is 2.29, something like that. So we can still rank them, and we give higher chance to the one which is slightly better, although they are very close to each other, but they are slightly different. Okay, now that we have found the parents, for the sake of natural selection, what do we do? Let's let them mate. Let them mate in order to generate the children of the next generation. How do we do that? That's called crossover in genetic algorithm. Mating of parent chromosomes to generate offsprings or children. It's good for, I can say, both exploration and exploitation. Why? I will tell you at the end of crossover why it's good for both exploration and exploitation. So we have several types of crossover. One of them is one-point crossover. So in one-point crossover, we have 2 chromosomes as the 2 parents. We randomly select a crossover point from 1 to D, which is the dimensionality or the number of genes. And then we select, for example, the first part of the first parent and the second part of the second parent to make this child. So we put this next to this, it gives us child 1. We can also have the second child, it's optional, but we can have it by doing the other way around. We take the first part of second parent and the second part of first parent. We put them together. We can also have multi-point crossover. What do? We have the 2 parents. We have 2 crossover points. So, or several crossover points, whatever. And then we take, for example, this part and this from the first part of the first parent, the second part of the second parent, the third part of the first parent to make child 1. We can also have child 2, which is the other way around. The first part of parent 2, the second part of parent 1, the third part of parent 2 can give us child 2. This is child 1, and this can give us child 2, right? We can also have uniform crossover. What does it do? So uniform crossover says that I have 2 parents, and for each gene, I flip a coin. So randomly, I choose either this or this, the gene from one of them or the other one. And then I can have multiple children in this way. For example, in this, I can say, I take this, and this next to them, each other, and this can give me child 1. I can have the other way around to have child 2. I can also do some more flips, random generations of the genes to make other children too, right? This is what is called uniform crossover. So we randomly select the genes from the 2 parents and put them together to make the child. Another one is whole arithmetic crossover. What does it do? So so far, what the crossover algorithms, they were just copying and pasting some parts from each parent next to each other to make the child. However, whole arithmetic crossover says that let's have a linear combination of the 2 parents and use all of their genes, both genes from the both parents. For example, here, it can be the offspring 1 or child 1 can be alpha x1 and plus 1 minus alpha x2, or child 2 can be alpha x2 plus 1 minus alpha x1, where alpha is between 0 and 1. So it's an interpolation or linear combination of these two parents. Like this, an example, if alpha is 0.3, it's a child 1 can be 0.3 times 3 plus 0.7 times 4. The second gene, 0.3 times 2 plus 0.7 times 1. We can have the other way around for the child 2. Okay. So now that we had crossover, now that the children have been generated, the children can now have some mutation. So they have some mutation. They can have some mutations in their genes or DNAs to have some difference compared to what a linear combination or of their parents, something like that. So they might have some new thing added to them. And if that new thing is good for adapting to their environment, it will remain in them. And it will also be transferred to the next generations. And this, if that mutation is good, it will grow in the different generations gradually, and it might become dominant, a dominant characteristic in that type of organism. However, if that's not good for adapting to the environment, it will be usually emitted after several generations. So an example of mutation maybe, for example, in the giraffes, some of the giraffes, children giraffes, had longer necks. That was a good mutation for adapting to the environment, for reaching the top of the trees. Therefore, that remained in them. And they remained, the other ones died, so they could mate with the ones which remained, could mate with each other, and this characteristic was transferred to their children as well. So this is mutation. So random changes to the offsprings after crossover. This is good for exploitation. By the way, I said crossover is good for exploration and exploitation both. Why? Because when you have two parents mating with each other, maybe depending on the crossover point, if the crossover point, for example, is here, one of the child will be very similar to one of the parents. So it means that the child is close to that parent in the optimization landscape. So it's like a local search, because you have moved a little bit from the parent. So it's that will be for exploitation. But if the child, the crossover point, for example, is in the middle, something like that, it means that the child is far away from the two parents. It's a bit further from them. So it's good for exploration. It means that it will explore the different areas in the optimization landscape. Mutation is good for mutation is good for exploration. What does it mean? It means that you have a child, but you also apply some random change in it for mutation, so it goes further away in the landscape, so it can search some maybe unseen areas in the optimization landscape. So it's good for exploration. So we have different types of mutation. One of them is bit flip mutation. One of them is swap mutation. So what is bit flip mutation? It means that assume you have binary chromosomes, then you can randomly select some of the bits and then flip them, if from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. Swap mutation, you randomly select two genes. It's not only, this mutation is not only for binary. It can be for float genes too, float value genes too. So you randomly select two genes and then you swap them, for example. Or a scramble mutation. What is a scramble mutation? It says that I take randomly a portion of the chromosome, child chromosome, and then I scramble the genes in that portion. For example, 2, 4, 5 becomes 4 to 5, something like that. Inversion mutation. I take randomly a portion of the chromosome and then I invert them. So 2, 4, 5 becomes 5, 4, 2. Okay. Termination. So we have usually termination check or termination criterion in Metaheuristic optimization algorithms. By the way, it's better not to use convergence criterion for the Metaheuristic optimization methods, because for convergence you need to converge to some local optimum. But in search-based or Metaheuristic optimization methods, you don't necessarily converge to the local optimum. You might be close to it, and you are not necessarily. You don't know whether what you have found is global optimum or not. And even you might not be exactly the local minimum or a local optimum. You might be close to it. So it's better to call it termination criterion. And for that, we can have different criterion, such as maximum number of iterations, or another one is maximum elapsed time. So for example, after 3 hours, or maximum number of iterations, for example, after 100 iterations, something like that. Or a small enough cost compared to a known threshold. For example, you know that the range of your function value is between 0 and 1. So if you want to minimize a function, if you get close enough to 0, which is the minimum range of the function value, then you can terminate. Or if you are maximizing, if you get to the upper bound of the function close enough, then you can terminate, something like that. So as long as you know the range or some threshold, then you can do this. Also, flowchart. Usually Metaheuristic optimization algorithms are shown and depicted by some flowcharts to show their algorithms. So for example, genetic algorithm here is the flowchart. So we initialize the chromosomes here, and then we calculate the fitness values of the chromosomes. And then we do the natural selection. We select the parents for the next generation. We do crossover to generate the children of the next generation from the selected parents. Then we do random mutation on the children. Then we do the termination check. If termination is not reached, we go back and we calculate the fitness of the chromosomes again, and we select the parents again and do this iteratively. So this is an iteration, and if the termination is reached, then give X with the best fitness. So this is a flow chart of the genetic algorithm. Okay. Okay, now let's continue with the particle swarm optimization. So this is another Metaheuristic optimization algorithm. Its idea is this. So particle swarm optimization, it was proposed in 1995 in paper 3. Okay, and the idea of PSO is like finding a treasure by a group of people. So the example is, as I said initially in the session, assume you have a room where in the ground of the room there is some treasure, but we want to find that. How can we find a treasure? Then we say, okay, let's randomly, we are some people, let's randomly select some points in the, each of us select some region in the room, and then we dig. And we search locally around ourselves. And then, for example, I find some pot, and also when I'm searching around myself, I find some pot and some mud, and some gold, for example. So I say, okay, among in my local search, gold was better. So someone also searches around themselves and finds mud, nothing very good around it. So another person searches and finds mud and diamond. Diamond is much better. So we say, okay, now we announce at the end of the iteration, announce what we have found best in our local searches. For example, I say I have found gold around me, which is good. Also, Someone says, I have found mud, which is not much good. Someone says, I have found diamond. Then we say, okay, let's all of us move a bit toward the diamond person because diamond is our global best. However, we also consider our local best, each of us too. For example, I also move toward the place that I found the gold in my local neighborhood. But at the same time, I also go toward the diamond. So I have two vectors, one of which is toward the gold of my area, and the other one is toward the diamond of the other person, which is a global best. And I go as to a linear combination of these vectors in these directions. So each person does that, so goes to their local best and also to the global best. And we gradually converge to the maybe actual global best treasure under this ground, and we are searching wisely, as you see. Maybe when I'm moving toward the diamond, I find something better in the middle of my way, better than diamond, and then I announce it, and at that iteration, the global best is updated to what I have found, and now from now on, people will move towards my finding, something like that. Okay, and PSO was inspired by a flock of birds or a group of fish. So a group of or a herd of um, some animals or birds that because you can see these people that, for example, we were looking for the treasure. You can see these people as the animals or the particles searching for something, and that's why it's called particle swarm optimization. First off, it's a swarm or a herd or a group of particles. Second off, there are some particles which want to find something good. That's why it's called particle swarm optimization. And also, it's a bio-inspired algorithm because it's based on it's inspired by biological behavior of birds or fish or animals, and it's also a swarm optimization algorithm. So its swarm optimization methods are a family of methods which are based on swarm or herd or group of animals or individuals. There are many other bio-inspired or swarm metaheuristic optimization algorithms, such as ant colony proposed in 1996, gray wolf optimizer in 2014, whale optimization algorithm in 2016. Ant colony is based on the colony of ants. Also, gray wolf optimizer, a colony of gray wolves which attack a mammal, for example, and whale optimization algorithm, mimicking the behavior of whale in oceans. And these two, for example, are proposed by a scholar in this area who is Said Ali Mirjalili. He's in Torrens University, Australia. He's a professor there now. He has proposed many materialistic optimization algorithms, especially bio-inspired ones. Okay. So in PSO, the candidate solutions are called particles, which are the vectors, right? And every particle searches locally in local neighborhood. So here is a slight difference between PSO and genetic algorithm. In genetic algorithm, our exploitation can be done only in the case that when the child of a parent is close to it, then we'll have some exploitation, but we don't have any local search. So every chromosome doesn't have a local search around it. In the original variant of genetic algorithm, we have this. Maybe in some other variants of genetic algorithm, every chromosome also searches locally, but in original variant, it doesn't have local search. However, in PSO, every particle has some local search in a neighborhood around every candidate solution. Also, there are three things for updating the solution. As I said, the particles move toward each other, toward the best solution. So we have some velocity vectors for these updates, movements. And one of them is the momentum or history of previous velocity. So assume we are in the k+1 iteration. So VIK is the velocity vector or the update vector of the previous iteration. So we can, this is for exploitation. For exploitation, we have we also have the log of the history or the momentum. This is also inspired by the momentum in classic optimization. So we also can move toward our local best in the iteration. That's for exploitation again. XIK is where we are now, and X local best is the local best. And we want to go toward our local best. That would be for exploitation, but we can also move toward the global best. That would so it means that the vector from XIK where we are now to the global best, and that's for the exploration. By the way, we can have two variants of each of these. So one variant is that in the first variant, global best refers to the best solution found so far from iteration 1 until now. Whatever we have found, the best of best solution so far is the global best. In this variant, at the end of the algorithm, we return the global best, right? And in this variant, local best can be seen as the best of the local searches of all particles in this iteration. So it means that we move toward the local best of this iteration. We also move toward the global best so far. This is one variant. Another variant, global best is the global best of this iteration only. So the best of the local searches in this iteration, but local best can be seen the best of every particle. So every particle searches locally, it can have some best around it. And that would be the best of every particle. So it can be variant 2. We can have different variants of the algorithm. Here again we have a alpha 1, alpha 2, and alpha 3 are three scalars for weighting or regularization hyperparameters for weighting these terms. So we have the linear combination of the previous update, also move into the local best and move into the global best. Okay. So this is in this example, I am visualizing the PSO. For example, here I'm visualizing this. Assume I have 3 points, x1 and x2 and x3. And here I'm visualizing for I think the second variant that I've described. But doesn't matter, the first variant is also similar. So assume we have local search around each point, x1, x2, x3, each of which is d-dimensional. Also, assume the best solution in the local search of x2 is here, the best of x3 is here, the best of x1 is here. And among these three, this is the best, which is the global best of this iteration. So I go from this, I have a vector from x1 toward this global best, x global minus x1. I have this also from x1 to local of best of x1, which is here, x local minus x1. I have also assumed that this was the previous vector for the update of x1. So I have these three vectors. I have a linear combination of them. This will be the new the v1 k+1, the new velocity vector for this iteration for moving x1. So x1 will be moved around here. So it has moved toward the global best, also a bit toward its local best. Maybe in the middle of way, it finds some good solution. We do the same for x2 and x3, right? Okay. So this is the flow chart of PSO. We initialize the particles, then we calculate the fitness values. We do local search around each particle. We move the particles. Then we check the termination criterion. If it's not reached, then we calculate the fitness again. We do another iteration. So it is iterative. If the termination is reached, then give X with the best fitness. Okay. Now let's talk about another algorithm, which is simulated annealing. Simulated annealing is based on Boltzmann distribution. I will tell you what. The Boltzmann distribution, also called the Gibbs distribution, can show a probability that a physical system can have a specific state. That is, every of the particles has a specific state. So we have some particles in the physics, especially this is discussed in the statistical physics and computational physics. You can take a look at Ising models and these things. Ising model written as this. It's related to this topic, Ising model. And other things such as the statistical physics and high energy physics and computational physics. These are related. So we can show this the distribution of the states of the particles by Boltzmann or Gibbs distribution, and it is defined as this. The probability mass function for this distribution is this. So X is the particle and E of X is the energy of the variable or particle. T is the temperature in kelvins, and Z is the normalization factor so that its integral becomes 1. We also have normalization factor in almost all of the distributions such as Gaussian distribution. If you can see, there is a denominator for that. So also we can restate it in this way, where we say delta E is the difference of energy. So the probability of difference of energy is E. E is the Neper number, E to the minus delta E over T over Z, right? Okay. Simulated annealing algorithm was proposed in 1983, and it is inspired by the annealing schedule in high energy physics for forming the shape of materials. What is annealing schedule? It says that in high energy physics, it says that I start with high temperature and the material is in the high temperature, so the molecules move a lot, and I gradually cool it down so it becomes more stable. This is annealing schedule. Similarly, in simulated annealing, we cool down the temperature, or we reduce the temperature gradually, iteratively. So here we have different ways to cool it down. So one of them is linear reduction rule. T equals T minus some alpha, positive alpha in every iteration. Or we have a geometric reduction rule where we say T equals T times alpha, where alpha is between 0 and 1, so it is reducing. Or a slow decrease rules where we say T equals T over 1 plus beta T, where beta is a hyperparameter. Okay, simulated annealing algorithm. So in step 1, choose some random initial candidate solutions, again, like particles or candidates that we had in PSO and genetic algorithm respectively. So choose some random initial candidates and initial temperature. In step 2, in every iteration, do a local search in a neighborhood of the candidates. In a neighborhood of the candidates, do a local search and choose a neighbor point for every candidate. So you have several candidates. Every candidate takes one of the neighbor points around it, and then evaluates its fitness value. So it has its own fitness value. It has the fitness value of its neighbor in the local search. Now let's see if it should accept that or not. If the neighbor has a better fitness value than the candidate, it means that its cost is low or its fitness is higher. So here in simulated annealing, we usually use cost. So if its cost function value is lower, it means if delta E is the energy, right? Difference of energy. But here we assume it is the change of cost. So if delta E is less than 0, it means that the cost of the neighbor is less than the cost of the point itself, then accept it. Accept that neighbor point and replace the current solution with that neighbor with probability 1. However, if delta E is greater than 0, it means that the neighbor has a worse cost or a higher cost than the current solution. Then it doesn't say absolutely reject that. Accept it with some probability, And this probability is proportional, is related to the temperature, and we'll discuss how it is related to the temperature. But with some probability between 0 and 1, accept that. Why do we do that? This gives a chance to even worse candidates for the sake of exploration. If we don't do that, if we only replace the candidate solutions with the better solutions, we might get stuck to the local optimum, which is most of the Metaheuristic optimization algorithms are prone to getting stuck in the local optimum, right? So we need to have exploration. We need to give chance to even worse solutions a bit in order to not to get stuck in the local optimum. So this is the philosophy behind it. And now let's talk about the temperature, how it is related to the probability of accepting the worst candidates. So this is the thing. This is the graph of E to the minus 1 over T. So this is the T-axis, and this is E to the minus 1 over T. We have it here. This is E to the minus delta E over T, right? So for in initial iterations, by the way, it's between 0 and 1. So it's like a probability. And it's around T equals 0, it is 0. When T goes to infinity, it becomes close to 1. All right. So in initial iterations, temperature T is high, which means we are around here, right? In initial iterations. Do you remember in simulated annealing, we start with high temperature. So this is large. E to the minus 1 over T is large, close to 1. Here, we are here. So we give more chance to worse candidates because this is higher. So it means that we accept the worst candidates with higher probability. So we have more exploration. In the initial iterations, we have more exploration. We give more chance for acceptance of worse candidates. However, in the end iterations, temperature T is very low, right? So by passing the iterations, we are moving toward this direction. T becomes very small, so this also becomes very small. This probability becomes very small. It means that we don't accept the worst candidates often. So most often we reject them. So because it's close to 0, so we gave less chance to worse candidates. So we have more exploitation. We only accept the better solutions, right? So, and this is a good idea for Metaheuristic optimization. Initially, in most of the optimization algorithms, we initially have more exploration because we initially don't know the optimization landscape well enough. So let's explore. But gradually, we start to exploit and we explore less. Also, humans' behavior is like that. When human is a teenager or very young, in early youth, they want to explore everything in the world. But gradually, when they become older, they don't want to explore much. They want to exploit, to focus to what they are doing. You can see it in our behavior too. That's interesting. Also, it is like in classic optimization, we also have the same thing. It is like starting with large learning rate in gradient descent initially, and then decrease the learning rate gradually. Do you remember? When we have adaptive learning rate in gradient descent, or even in machine learning in backpropagation for optimizing neural networks, what do? We usually have higher learning rate and we gradually reduce the learning rate. So initially we have higher jumps. We are exploring more, but when we get closer to the solution, we have less jumps. We are exploiting more. So this is the idea of simulated annealing. It's interesting. Another algorithm is Nelder-Mead Simplex algorithm. So far we talked about genetic algorithm, PSO, and simulated annealing. The Nelder-Mead algorithm is a slightly different. It's also a Metaheuristic or heuristic optimization algorithm, but it's slightly different. So it was Nelder-Mead Simplex algorithm, also called Nelder-Mead method. It was proposed by John A. Nelder and Roger Mead in 1965. Interestingly, it is used in the fmin search function of MATLAB. And I think now you know why it's called fmin search. It's function minimization search. And why is it called search? Because it's a search-based optimization algorithm. It's a metaheuristic algorithm. So the idea is interesting. It says that let's select the candidate solutions or the particles or the whatever you call it, let them be the corners of some simplex. So as I said, in metaheuristic algorithms, we usually have some candidate solutions named differently in different algorithms. For example, in genetic algorithm, they are chromosomes. In PSO, they are called particles. In simulated annealing, they are called particles again, or candidate solutions. In Nelder-Mead Simplex algorithm, they are corners of a simplex or points of the simplex, right? And what is simplex? Simplex is generalization of triangle or pyramid to higher dimensions. So in R2, simplex is a triangle. In R3, simplex is a pyramid. In R4, then you need to imagine it. So, and as you see in R2, we need 3 corners or 3 points. In R3, we need 4 corners. So in D dimension, we need D plus 1 points as the corners of the simplex to make a simplex, right? In R4, for example, we need 5 corners, something like that. So it says that let's randomly select D plus 1 random points if the optimization variable is D-dimensional, and it will give us a simplex. Now, then let's update this simplex gradually toward the best solution. How do we update that? So we update this simplex iteratively and gradually until it converges to the optimal solution. It means 2 things actually. Gradually moving that simplex toward the optimal solution, also shrinking that simplex toward the optimal solution. So while it is being moved gradually toward the solution, it is also shrinked, becoming smaller and smaller. So at the end, the corners of the simplex will become very close to the optimal solution, converge to that. So this is the idea behind Nelder-Mead Simplex algorithm. As it is using simplex in it, it's called Nelder-Mead Simplex method. But you shouldn't confuse it with the simplex algorithm for solving linear optimization, which we discussed initially in the course. That's different. That was for linear programming. This is not equivalent to that. This is a metaheuristic optimization algorithm. Okay. Now, let's talk about this algorithm a bit more, with more depth. So, initial simplex. Again, as we talked about it, if the optimization variable is D-dimensional, then we choose D plus 1 random points in the feasible set to make a simplex. So this simplex is chosen in the feasible set, right? And it's moved in the feasible set. And this initial simplex is very important. Why? Because a too small simplex, initial simplex, may get stuck in the local optimum. It cannot do enough exploration. Of course, obviously, because if you choose your simplex very close, where the corners of them to be close to each other, then they cannot explore well in the optimization landscape. So one suggestion for making the initial simplex is by the original paper of Nelder-Mead method. It says that do this. Choose the first corner, x1, which is a D-dimensional vector, randomly. Let it be random point in the feasibility set. But for the other corners, x2 to x2 to xd plus 1, do this. Let them be a fixed step along each dimension in turn. For example, for x2, let it be x11 plus some delta, and the rest will be the same as x1. For x3, let the second element be plus some delta, and the rest will be the same as x1. Also, do the same until xd plus 1. The last element, let it be plus delta, and the rest will be the same as x1. And delta should be positive and not too small number, because if it's a too small number, the initial simplex will be small and it can't explore well. Okay. So now order. We want to minimize this function f, right? We want to minimize. In the feasibility set, we make some in simplex, and we change it in the feasibility set iteratively to converge to the solution. This is the idea of Nelder-Mead algorithm. Now let's talk about the operators in this algorithm. One of them is order or sorting. So at the start of every iteration, because it's iterative, right? At the start of every iteration, we order or sort the corners of the simplex. So like this, we rename the corners from x1 to xd plus 1, where x1 is the best corner and xd plus 1 is the worst corner, because x1 has the minimum, the cost function among the corners, and xd plus 1 has the largest cost function among the corners. So we are denoting them. And now let's talk about centroid. Okay. We calculate the centroid of all points except the worst point, xd plus 1. So the mean or average of all points except the worst point, let it be the centroid denoted by xo. Reflection. The reflected point. What is it? We define it as this. By the way, for the centroid, I have drawn this here. For example, assume we are in 2 dimensions, okay? And our cost is drawn like this. So I'm drawing the lines for the cost. In each line, the cost value is the same. And here, this means that I have like a bowl coming up. Here, around here is the minimum, right? By the way, Nelder-Mead algorithm, if it is a convex optimization problem, it will find a global solution. Otherwise, it might find a local solution, local best solution. Okay, now x1, x2, x3. So what do we do here? Assume x1 is the best, x2 is the second best, and x3 is the worst. I think by this cost value, you can also understand what I'm talking about. Now, here I have drawn the centroid. So centroid xo is the mean of x1 and x2. We exclude x3. So the mean of these will be xo here. This is the centroid. Now, reflected point. What is that? It means that this is a vector or direction from xd plus 1 to xo. And it means that starting from xo, go to the direction from xd plus 1 to xo with some length alpha. Alpha is a factor, multiplication factor of this direction. Okay, doesn't matter. It means that, let's see, so from xo, what is this direction? From xd plus 1, from x3 toward xo, which is in this direction. This is the length, but times alpha, this length times alpha, starting from xo. So starting from this point, not from this point. Starting from this point, go in this direction. Go in this direction. And alpha should be positive. Why? Because I want to go to the other side of the simplex. That's why it's called reflected point. If alpha is negative, I will go to toward the simplex, toward the inside of the simplex. That wouldn't be the reflected point. So I want to go to the other side, therefore alpha is positive, and alpha is usually set to 1. Why? Because I want this length to be the same as this length, right? So therefore from XO, we go in the direction of XD plus 1 to XO. It means this, and this is the reflected point. As you see, this is the reflection of almost the worst point. So X3 reflected by other corners will give us the reflected point. Now, let's see. Okay, this reflected point has 3 cases. The function value in this reflected point. It's either between the best point x1, the best corner, and the one to the worst corner, which is xd, or it is its function cost value is better than x1 or less than x1, or it might be greater than xd. So it's either f of xr is less than f of x1, or f of xr is between f of x1 and f of xd, or f of xr is greater than f of xd. These 3 cases might happen, right? Now we will discuss each of these cases. So if f of xr is between the best and 1 to the last worst corner, then replace the worst point with the reflected point. Why do we do that? For example, here, what does it mean? What does this case mean? It means that xr is worse than x1, but it's better than x2. We know that x2 is better than x3. Therefore, as xr is better than x2, it's better than x3 also. So xr is better than x3. Therefore, let's replace x3 with xr. Replace the worst corner with the reflected point. So it means that reflect the simplex along other corners, like this, right? This simplex became like this. And it makes sense because we are going toward the better direction, because apparently xr is better than x2. Apparently the function cost value is reducing in this direction. And also it has some connection with the opposition learning proposed in 2005. Also, opposition learning has been used in metaheuristic optimization in differential evolution in 2008. By the way, these are proposed after Nelder-Mead algorithm, which was proposed in 1965. But I'm saying that there is some relation to these opposition learning. And what is opposition learning? It says that whatever you learn its opposite too. So as you see, it's reflecting, it's having the opposite of that. So it's slightly related to that too. Another thing is expansion. So now we consider this case where we said if f of xr is between x1 and xd, what if f of xr is less than f of x1? It means that it's better than the best corner. x1 was the best corner. xr has better cost or less cost than x1 even. So this means that x reflected point is better than all of the corners, right? If that's the case, we calculate the expanded point. What is expanded point? It means that starting from XO, go in this direction. What is that? Direction connecting XO toward XR. XO is here, XR is here. This is the direction. Starting from XO, going in this direction. But how much? Gamma. Gamma is, first off, greater than 1. Why? Because I want to go further than the reflected point, because I want to expand it. I want to expand the reflected simplex. So as I want to expand it, gamma shouldn't be less than 1, because if it's between 0 and 1, I will end up here around in this range, right? Between XO and XR. So it won't be expanded. It shouldn't be -2, because otherwise I will go in this direction. I want it to be reflected. So it should be greater than 1, usually 2. When it's 2, it means that this length is the same as this length, right? Because it's 2 of these. Now, this is XO. Sorry, XE, expanded point, XE. This is centroid point XO, this is the reflected point XR, and this is expanded point XE. Okay. Why do we do that? Because we know that XR is better than X1, X2, and X3, all of the corners. So it apparently the function here is really reducing here in this direction. Why? Because this reflected point is better than all of these corners. So let's go further than X reflected point. Apparently it's working very well. Now let's discuss several sub cases in this case. We evaluate the fitness value in the expanded point, XE. If f of XE is less than f of XR, it means that f of XR was better than X1, X2, and X3. If XE expanded point is even better than XR2, so it's better than XR, X1, X2, X3, all of them, it means that really the function is reducing here. So let's replace the worst point with expanded point. So X3 becomes here. The worst point becomes the best point now for the next iteration. So we replace it here. However, if XE expanded point is not better than the reflected point, it means, what does it mean? It means that here we have some local minimum is better than these expanded point, also better than these corners. So let's replace the reflected point, is the worst point, with the reflected point. Don't go further than that. In this case, we'll replace XD plus 1 with the worst corner with a reflected point. And we go to the next iteration and we order the points again. In the previous case also, after we replace the worst corner with a reflected point, we go to the next iteration and we order the points again. So this is done iteratively. Here also, when we update these worst point, we go to the next iteration and we order the points again. The next thing is contraction, which is for the other case. So we talked about the case where XR reflected point is between X1 and XD. We also talked about when XR is better than X1. Now let's talk about the case where XR is worse than XD. Its cost is greater than or equal to the XD, the second worst corner. If that's the case, which is the third case, it has several subcases, 2 subcases. One subcase is if it's larger than XD, it might be better than XD plus 1, better than the worst corner. So it is worse than the second worst corner, but it might be better than the worst corner. If that's the case, it means that f of XR is between f of XD and f of XD plus 1, right? In this case. Then what do? We calculate, we define this contracted point outside. What is this? Let's see. It means that starting from XO, go in this direction. Go in this direction. What is this direction? Direction of XO toward XR. XO toward XR in this direction. Go in this direction with the factor of, starting from XO, with the factor of rho, where rho is between 0 and half. So it's in this row is not negative, so we don't go in this side. Row is positive, and we also, row is between 0 and half, usually set to half. It means that this length, whatever it is, we go to the half of this length. So this contracted point outside becomes here, between XO and XR, right? So we are, what are we doing here? We are saying that we might reflect the simplex, but contract it. We have a contracted reflected simplex, right? We don't go toward the up to the reflected point. We go toward up to the contracted point. Okay, now we have two subcases. If the contracted point is better than the reflected point, what does it mean? Here, it means this. This is a reflected point. This is a contracted point. If this is better than XR, we know that XR is worse than X1. X1 is better than XR. XR is worse than X2. So XR is worse than both X1 and X2. But in this case, it's better than X3. XR is better than X3. So probably F is decreasing in this direction. F is decreasing in this direction. So it's good to reflect the simplex, but how? Let's see. Let's calculate the contracted point. Is XC better than the reflected point? If yes, then replace the worst corner with XC. So the simplex is reflected, but in a contracted way, right? By the way, why don't we want to replace the worst corner with XR anymore in this case? Because XR is not an ideal corner anymore, because it's worse than X1 and X2, right? That's why we say, okay, XR, we want to go toward you, but not as much as you, because you are not very good. You are worse than X1 and X2. If XC is even worse than XR, so XR is worse than X1 and X2, XC is worse than XR. In this case, we don't replace the worst point, the first corner with XC or XR anymore. We don't replace anymore. We just shrink. We just shrink the simplex. How? We replace every point with every point, maybe except the best point X1, by this Xi, the ith point, the ith corner, with X1 plus sigma times Xi minus X1. What does it mean? It means that starting from the point X1, go to the direction from X1 to Xi with a factor sigma, where sigma is usually set to half. What does it mean? Let's see. Here, for example, here, this is the simplex, right? This is the simplex. Going from X1 toward what is the direction? X1 toward X2, but sigma should be between 0 and 1, usually set to half. It means that I will come in this direction up to here, right? Or here for X3, I go from X1 toward X3, but half of the length. So I come here. So the new corners will be here like this. So this simplex has shrunk. You can ignore this part except the base point to y, because if you put X1 in this equation, it means that X1 equals X1. X1 doesn't move. Doesn't matter. After doing all of these, you go to the next iteration and order the points again. Okay. Now this case, if f of xr is greater than or equal to f of xd, what we had this case also here, but the next stop case. So the same case where xr is worse than x1 to xd, but it's also worse than the worst point. So this means that f of xr is worse than all of the corners. All of the corners. It's worse. What does it mean? XR here is worse than X1, X2, and X3. Then, of course, it means that apparently the function is decreasing in the same direction as the simplex. So let's not reflect it anymore, right? Then what do? We calculate this. We define contracted point inside. The previous one was contracted point outside. Now the contracted point inside is defined as this. Starting from the point XO, go to the direction from XO toward XD plus 1. Where is that? XO here toward X3. XD plus 1 is X3 here. Toward this direction, starting from XO, and rho is here is between 0 and half, usually set to half. So it means go inside the simplex. From XO toward, in the direction from XO toward X3, and as rho is between 0 and half, it's not greater than 1, so it doesn't go outside of the simplex. If rho was greater than 1, we would come up here maybe. But now we go to the inside the simplex. So the contracted point will be inside the simplex now. Okay. Now let's see. We evaluate the function value, cost value in this xc. If f of xc is less than f of xd plus 1, what does it mean? It means that this contracted point is better than the worst point here. If that's the case, then replace the worst point with the contracted point. So contract the simplex in the same direction. The previous one was contract the simplex in the reflected direction. This is contract the simplex in the same direction. If no, the XC is even worse than the worst corner, so it means that it's worse than all of the corners, then just like before, shrink the simplex. Don't replace the corners anymore. Just shrink the simplex. If then to go to the next iteration and order the points again. As you see, the algorithm of Nelder-Mead algorithm is summarized in this way. It says that I have a simplex. In every iteration, I replace the worst corner with some update. And this update tries to make the worst corner the best corner of the next iteration. So I always order the corners. In order to have a better simplex, let's replace the worst corner with something else. So that simplex becomes better and goes toward the solution. Okay. I have written it as a pseudocode here too. So summarizing what we had. Initialize simplex with d plus 1 points in the feasibility set. We have loop until convergence. We have a loop. It's because it's iterative. Calculate the centroid, CO. Calculate the reflected point XR that we talked about. The other side of the simplex. With respect to the worst point. And then we have three cases. If XR is between X1 and XD, it's cost value. So it's worse than the best corner, but better than the second worst corner. Then what do? We replace the worst corner with the reflected point. And we do continue. Continue means go to the next iteration and order them again. By the way, here I need to have order the corners. I have forgot to mention this. Order corners and then calculate this. Order corners again and do this. So if f of xr is less than or equal to f of x1, it means that it's better than all of the corners. Why? Because it's better than the best corner, so it's better than all of the corners. Then calculate the expanded point. If the function value of expanded point is less than reflected point, so it means that if the expanded point is better than the reflected point, then replace the worst corner with the expanded point. Otherwise, replace the worst corner with the reflected point and then continue. Go to the next iteration and order again. Order the points again. Another case is that when the reflected point is worse than the second worst corner, its cost value is greater than or equal to f of xd. Then two subcases happen. It might be better than the worst corner or worse than the worst corner. If it's better than the worst corner, what does it mean? If f of xr is between f of xd and f of xd plus 1. If that's the case, then calculate the contracted point outside. Why? So because we want to maybe contract the reflected simplex in the reflected direction, because xr, although it's not ideal, but it's better than the worst corner. So then if the contracted point outside is better than the reflected point, replace the worst corner with the contracted point. Otherwise, shrink the simplex and go to the next iteration. Else, this else means that f of xr is worse than all of the, as we had it here, all of the points until f of xd plus 1, all of the corners. If that's the case, then calculate the contracted point inside the simplex, because maybe we want to contract the simplex in the same direction. If f of x, if the contracted point inside the simplex is better than the worst corner, then replace the worst corner with the contracted point inside the simplex. Otherwise, shrink the simplex and continue to the next iteration. Always you are replacing the worst corner, except the cases where we are shrinking, right? Okay. Now some acknowledgements. Some slides of this slide deck are inspired by the teachings of Professor Saeed Sharifian at Amir Kabir University of Technology, Tehran, Iran. His course, Biological Intelligence, was very interesting. It covered many metaheuristic optimization algorithms, including genetic algorithm, particle swarm optimization, and simulated annealing. Some slides of this slide deck are also inspired by these. For example, for genetic algorithm, these are good websites: particle swarm optimization, simulated annealing. Also, Nelder-Mead algorithm, its Wikipedia page is good. Some important references in this field. So, and this paper, this is for visualizing the loss landscape of neural networks, published in NeurIPS in 2018. That's good. Another one, this is the paper of Holland in 1975, paper proposing genetic algorithm. This is the paper proposing particle swarm optimization in 1995. This is a paper proposing ant colony in 1996. Also, this is another paper proposing. So these two papers are proposing ant colony 1996 and 2006 with the same author almost. And this is the paper of Gray Wolf Optimizer in 2014 by Mir Jalili and his brother and his supervisor. Also Whale Optimizer proposed by Mir Jalili in 2016. Mir Jalili at that time was a PhD student. Now he's a professor there in Australia. His focus is on metaheuristic optimization, especially bio-inspired metaheuristic optimization. I think he has also an algorithm named Dragonfly Optimizer. Also Boltzmann, this is in 1868 for Boltzmann distribution, paper for Boltzmann distribution. This is for Gibbs distribution in 1902. This is a book about statistical mechanics. Do you remember I said simulated annealing is related to statistical physics and computational physics? And this is simulated annealing in 1983. This one is the paper of Nelder-Mead algorithm by Nelder and Mead in 1965. This is the paper for opposition learning by Hamid Tishoush. And also opposition learning in differential evolution or in meteoristic optimization by Hamid Tishoush and Rahnamayan and Salama. This, by the way, differential evolution is one of the meteoristic optimization algorithms. We have a lot of them. We have various meteoristic optimization algorithms, some of which were mentioned here. So, for example, we have differential evolution. We have taboo search, or in taboo search, for example, we have a taboo table where we don't want to go to some of the solutions, and we put them in the taboo table, so they become taboo. We don't go toward that solutions. We also have, for example, genetic programming, which is different from genetic algorithm. We have ant colony. We talked about that. We have a lot of different meteoristic algorithms. I myself have proposed two of my first papers, very first papers, were on meteoristic optimization. One of them was, I remember, one of them was Pantagamaros mauticus swarm optimization, PMSO. So Gamaros is a creature in Caspian Sea, in the coast of the Caspian Sea. So I use that behavior of that creature, I remember, to design an algorithm with the help of Professor Said Sharifian. And also there was another one, tree-based optimization, with the help of Professor Said Sharifian and Professor Huda Mohammed-Zadeh. I proposed a tree-based, so it's similar to the branch and bound method, but for the meteoristic optimization, not for classic optimization. I proposed that where we stochastically we go traverse the tree in order to find the local best or global best by stochastically. So we need to do it several times in order to find a better solution. So you can find this, one of them, as I said, is Pantagamaros mauticus swarm optimization, a meteoristic optimization algorithm, and then the other one was tree-based optimization, a meta algorithm for meteoristic optimization. These two were two of my very first papers in science. Okay, thank you very much.